I read that in 1974, you can sort of correct me if this
Mhm.
is just sort of website, World Wide Web rumor, but I read
Yeah.
that in 1974, in solidarity with the recently arrested Angela Davis, since you just brought it up, the group bombed the Center for International Affairs at Harvard. Is this true? Did it happen? What can you tell us about this event?
Yeah, it is true. It did happen. And in fact, the responsibility was claimed not just by the Weather Underground, but by a group within the Weather Underground of female revolutionaries. So it was specifically an act by women in the group to show solidarity with Angela and to try to say, she's not alone in her struggle, and other people, in particular white people, are going to stand up with her.
I mean, how risky this must have been. What were your parents' what were your grandparents sort of thinking about this? How did they sort of, I'm just wondering what your mother said about how her parents would have sort of looked at her and sort of the risks that she was really taking professionally and personally. How did they perceive what was happening?
They were very, very concerned, very
Mm,
worried, very worried for her safety. My grandfather, was a child of Jewish immigrants. He was a Republican, considered himself a patriot, grew up in Wisconsin. So for him, for his daughter to become a revolutionary and a most wanted fugitive was unthinkable and
mm,
very confusing. And also, the FBI tried to make it as difficult, of course, as they could for the family. They were hoping for leads into how to catch these people. So they would show up at my grandfather's house at 2 a.m, knock on the door, and say, "We think your daughter's dead, and we want you to come to the morgue and identify her." And then they
mhm.
would drive him to a place and identify some Jane Doe body that they had. So it was very difficult for their parents. I mean, they were generationally and politically just deeply, deeply alienated from them and could not understand what their kids had become.
I've read online an awful lot about a specific explosion at the home of member Kathy Wilkerson in 1970, which resulted in deaths of three members and also destroyed the group's legitimacy in many ways. Can you tell us a little bit about what was happening with that? Who was involved? Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the townhouse explosion in Greenwich Village in 1970 was, really one of the darkest chapters of the Weathermen's story. And it occurred at a time when these young people were trying to decide, whether to go underground, what they could do, how they could try to kind of contribute to the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement. And some of the group's members, including this cell in New York, decided to start building bombs, explosives, and they were targeting Fort Dix, trying to make a statement about the Vietnam War. And they didn't really know what they were doing. They were college kids trying to be revolutionaries, and they crossed wires and blew up the bomb making factory that they had in the basement of their father's townhouse.
Hmm.
Three people were killed, including my father's girlfriend at the time, Diana Oughton, and his best friend, Terry Robbins. And in a
Hmm.
lot of ways, that explosion, that tragedy, set them on a very different path than they had been on up until
Hmm.
that point. And for my parents, at least, it really convinced them that while they could still try to kind of act radically and still try to make statements, that they didn't want to be involved in any actions where somebody would be hurt or killed. So they were very careful uh, after that terrible, event, to call in warnings to make sure that buildings were evacuated, and tried very hard not to hurt or kill anybody after their own friends had died in the struggle.